Welcome to your deep dive. Ever feel like you're constantly running on a hamster wheel, juggling like a million things at once?
It's a universal feeling.
Yeah, you're definitely not alone. So today we're diving into Eastern philosophy, going to see if we can unlock some secrets, how to find that balance, especially in the middle of all the craziness of modern life.
And we've got a really interesting jumping off point for our deep dive today. We're going to be looking at this conversation between a philosopher, Minjin Kim, and podcast host Jose de Padua from an episode of the Brazilian podcast, Diálogos Além da Fronteira.
So not your typical, dry philosophy lecture here. We're going to break down some really practical, actionable insights, things you can actually use in your everyday life. So first things first, when we talk about this idea of balance, what does that actually mean, especially from like an Eastern perspective?
Well, if you're picturing, monks chilling in a hammock, perfectly blissed out 24/7, that's not quite it.
Okay, good to know, because that doesn't sound very realistic.
It's way more dynamic than that, and honestly, much more interesting. In Eastern philosophy, one of the core concepts is this idea of yin and yang. You've probably seen that symbol.
Yeah, that black and white, kind of swirly one.
That's the one. But there's so much more to it than just a cool design.
So break it down for us. What does yin and yang actually represent?
Think of it like this. It's the interplay of forces that we usually see as opposites. So light and dark, action and stillness, or even something like work and leisure.
Okay, I'm starting to see it. So it's more nuanced than just like good versus bad or something like that.
Exactly. Yin and yang remind us that these forces, they're not meant to be separated, or like one conquers the other. They're interconnected, like two sides of the same coin. One can't exist without the other.
So it's not about eliminating one side, like trying to get rid of all the bad stuff and just have the good, but more about finding that balance point where they can coexist.
You got it. It's recognizing that life is full of these natural rhythms, these pushes and pulls, and that we don't have to resist them. We can learn to move with them.
That reminds me of something I heard once about Heraclitus, that Greek philosopher way back when.
Oh, yeah, I know who you mean. What about him?
He had this whole thing about change being the only constant, which always stuck with me.
That's such a good point, and it actually ties in perfectly. Because this idea of balance, finding harmony within opposing forces, it's not exclusive to Eastern thought. Heraclitus, even back then, was touching on some of these same concepts. He's got that famous quote, "No man ever steps in the same river twice, for it's not the same river and he's not the same man."
Man, those philosophers could really turn a phrase. But it makes sense. Like, it speaks to this constant change that shapes our reality.
Absolutely. And how we have to adapt to it, too.
Which is, easier said than done most of the time. I mean, intellectually, yeah, we get that life is about change, but how do we actually embody that? How do we, ride those waves of change without getting completely wiped out?
That is the million-dollar question.
Yeah.
And it's where we often bump up against a key difference in how Eastern and Western approaches kind of see things.
So we're talking like a fundamental difference in how Eastern and Western philosophies approach this whole idea of balance.
Yeah, and it's interesting because in this podcast we're looking at Minjin Kim. He really hits on this. He suggests that Western thought, especially since, the Enlightenment and all that, and
Right.
it's been so focused on control and reason. Like those are the tools we use to navigate the world.
So it's like we're trying to analyze everything, figure it all out, and then what? Like impose our will on it.
Yeah, exactly. And look, I'm not saying reason and logic are bad things. They have their place, obviously. But Kim's point is that this constant striving for control, it can actually lead us further away from balance.
Because we end up feeling like we have to manage every tiny detail of our lives. And then, when things don't go according to plan, which, let's be real, happens all the time.
All the time. And then we feel like we've failed.
Yeah.
Right? Like it's all on us. It's all about our ability to control things.
Which is kind of setting ourselves up for disappointment if you think about it. Because we're clinging to this illusion of control.
100%. So if that's the Western approach, what's the alternative? How does Eastern philosophy deal with this?
Yeah, what's the other side of that coin?
So instead of trying to dominate or control, it's more about finding harmony, alignment with the natural order of things.
And that includes
Both the world around us and, is the key, the world within us.
our inner world. And that's where I'm guessing things like stillness and meditation come into play.
You got it. Kim talks about this in the podcast, how in our modern world, it's so easy to feel disconnected from ourselves.
Oh, tell me about it.
Right. We're constantly bombarded with information, stimulation, doing, always on the go.
It's like my brain never shuts off.
Exactly. And we rarely take the time to just be. to just exist in the moment without all the noise.
So meditation then, how does that fit into all of this?
Well, I think there's sometimes this misconception that meditation is about, like, sitting on a cushion, emptying your mind completely, becoming some kind of Zen master.
Yeah, that doesn't sound very realistic for most of us.
It's not about that. It's really about cultivating presence, mindfulness, in every aspect of our lives, not just when we're sitting on a cushion.
So being present, even amidst the chaos.
Exactly. It's about noticing your thoughts, even those racing, anxious ones, but without judgment, just observing, and then gently bringing your attention back to the present moment, even if it's just for a few breaths.
So we're not talking about adding yet another thing to our to-do lists.
No, no, no.
More about finding these little pockets of peace.
Exactly. Even a few minutes of focused breathing or mindful walking, it can make a huge difference in how you feel. It's about shifting from that state of constant doing to a state of just being.
Okay, that makes sense. But let's get practical for a sec. Aside from meditation, what are some other ways we can apply these, Eastern principles to our daily lives? We were talking about Tai Chi before.
Oh, yeah, Tai Chi. That's a perfect example.
Tai Chi for finding balance.
Mhm.
I've got to say, I've been seeing more and more people doing it in the park. It always looks so interesting. What's it all about, really?
It's kind of like, imagine a series of really slow, intentional movements, almost like a moving meditation, really.
Okay.
So you're flowing from one posture to the next. And it's not about, muscle or anything. It's about cultivating this internal energy, what they call qi in traditional Chinese medicine.
So you're working on your mind and body at the same time.
Exactly.
I like it. I like it. But, I'm sure some of our listeners are thinking, okay, easier said than done, right? It's one thing to talk about finding balance, but it's like, how do you actually make it work in the midst of, real life?
And that's the thing. It's not about reaching this destination.
Mm-hmm.
Like, okay, I'm balanced now. Life just isn't like that. It's like
Right.
a constant process. It's about adapting, learning to kind of ride those waves, and always coming back to your center.
Yeah. You've given us a lot to think about today. If there's one thing you want our listeners to take away from this whole conversation about finding balance, what would it be?
I'd say if you're feeling that sense of overwhelm, remember this. You don't have to conquer the chaos. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is surrender. Not give up, but surrender to the natural flow of life.
Surrender to the flow. I like that.
Trust that even in the uncertainty, there's an order to things, a rhythm that we can all tap into.
So well said. And to all of you listening, what will you choose today? Will you let the chaos carry you away? Or will you seek that inner balance, that harmony within? It's a journey, no doubt. But it starts with those small moments, those breaths, those movements, those quiet spaces where you reconnect with yourself. Keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep. Until next time.